Welcome, fellow travelers. I'm Joe. This is Good Times RVing. A while back, I promised a review of all the front end suspension work that was accomplished on this RV. Well, I'm just back from a trip from Florida to New York and back. Actually, Florida, Pennsylvania with the RV, and then I took the car into New York City. So that trip was about 2,500 miles, thereabouts. And I was very pleased with the results. And let me share those with you. For those that are not familiar with what I did with the front end, I installed Koni shocks almost immediately, replacing the Bilsteins. And then I wanted to have a little less front end lean. So I installed a super steer sway bar, or anti-sway bar, more correctly named, which if this is the front axle, the sway bar essentially does very little when the front end's doing this, going up and down, a wheel here, a wheel here, the axle going up and down like this. Sway bar does very little. However, what it does do is it resists bending. So when your RV is like this, anti-sway bar does very little. But when you're in a turn and the coach is wanting to lean over, anti-sway bar resists that with spring pressure, actually torsional pressure. It keeps the RV from leaning. With the rear suspension, I have a liquid spring, so there's very little lean in the rear because it compensates for that. But the front was what I'll refer to as diving a little bit, and was leaning over. Made a very strange feel in the RV. So put in the heavier duty anti-sway bar. That issue is essentially addressed. We get very little leaning moment in turns. Combination of the liquid spring in the back and the large, very large anti-sway bar in the front. And I'll show you the mechanic holding on to that bar. It's a big, heavy, beefy piece. Okay, so I did that. But I still had this kind of wander that I couldn't address. And what was happening is that as the front end hit various anomalies in the road, potholes, lane separations, uneven lanes, slipping off onto the shoulder, etc., the axle was doing this. Not a lot, but enough. And it made the front end feel kind of vague. So what I installed were what's called radius rods. And that keeps the axle, this is the RV this way, keeps the axle from doing this. Because you'll get various bushings and spring wrap and all sorts of issues when the axle is put under load. It has a tendency to twist. The spring eyes have rubber bushings in it, and so you put pressure on it, it will rock like that. And consequently, the wheels start to steer in different directions, and the front starts to wander. I found that to be very disconcerting. I really felt disconnected from the front end. So I installed radius rods. Again, super steer radius rods. Very heavy pieces. And they did stop, to the greatest extent possible, this movement of the front axle. Granted, it's exaggerated, but it does move around and you can feel it. At least I can feel it. So on this last trip, I found that you could comfortably drive this RV at the speed limit with confidence. Wasn't wandering around, wasn't getting buffeted around. It would actually track straight. There my limit prior to that was between 62 and 65, depending on the road surface and how curvy the road was. Because over that, when I got up near 70, the front started to get very vague and was kind of just wandering around. Well, with this setup, all that wander, the vast majority of that wander is gone. And granted, you're still driving a big brick and it's subject to wind. But I'm very pleased that the vast majority of that wander is gone. And I can go along at 70 miles an hour on these southern roads where the speed limit's 70 or 75 in some instances. I probably would max it at 70. I don't think I'd go higher than that. There's other considerations. But I can drive all day long at 70 miles an hour without chasing the RV around the lane. I was very surprised at that. I really was surprised at that. Will I make it a habit? Probably not. But I wanted to see if I could do it. And I also I was by myself, me and my co-pilot. We're heading up north. And the other thing I concentrated on, and I was amazed how much concentration it took, was to hold the steering wheel steady. And let the suspension just soak up whatever the road gave at it. And even with the trucks going by, I mean, I could feel that pressure wave come right up along the side of the RV. And it was starting to lean it and push it and move it around. But I held that steering wheel straight, and I'll be darned if I stayed in lane. There was no departing this way or that. Hold the steering wheel straight, and for the most part, stay in lane. There was when it got really windy. I had to go through many rainstorms going north. Actually, from Georgia to Pennsylvania, it rained every day, practically all day, and heavy. But hold that steering wheel straight, and a lot of that driver-induced sway, which I can attest to, was gone. Really very surprised. I was running, I was heavy, so I was running at 110 psi in the front wheels, front tires. Typically I run those 85 to 90 depending on load, but I ran them right up to 110 because I knew I was heavy, and I had 110 in the back, and that got rid of the sidewall flex, which does add a little bit to this wander, but this thing tracked straight. I was very impressed. Again, I running at 70, tires start to get hot, and drive lines really working hard. So I probably will cap it at 65, just because it's just easier. And this going at 70 was literally exhausting, and you were just on it the whole time. You had to keep more space from the car in front of you, the truck in front of you. But it handled that and that was towing. It was with a tow car, and fully loaded. I was right at max, and this thing just sailed right down the lanes without issue. So anyway, that's my update. Radius rods, heavy duty sway bar, Koni shocks in the front, and I have liquid spring in the back. And this thing just tracks beautifully on the road. And at 65, it's just easy. I mean, just an easy day. You can just go along. I can do 4-hour days driving and not think much about it. Though this last trip was quite event filled. I made some pretty serious mistakes, errors on my part. I got to where the day started getting so involved, I started making mistakes. One, I ended up on an off-road excursion by mistake. The GPS took me down quite literally dusty loop, and it was a 2-track dirt road at the end, and I had to figure out a way to turn around. Luckily, the folks that lived down there several neighbors got together and we got the car off, and the dolly turned around and got me out of there. But it was quite the ordeal. And the other was I had a valve stem go bad on one of the rear tires of the Toad, and that turned out to be quite an ordeal. Pouring rain, trying to figure out what was wrong with the tire. It wasn't obvious, and thankfully that valve didn't depart and give me a blowout. It just would leak, and it would only leak when I put the sensor on it, because that had enough centrifugal force to where it would start to work that stem and start to let the air out. I took it to a tire shop. Quite honestly, you think that's easy to do, but when you got a 40-foot motorhome with a cat towing a car, trying to find a place to park, turn around, etc., it can be quite the challenge. Found two tire shops. The first one said, "You don't have a flat," and they, for whatever reason, missed the valve stem. You would think that's the first thing they'd check, but said I was fine to go. I got through that day because I left the sensor off, and I checked the pressure the next morning, saw it was low, and then I flicked the valve stem, heard the leak, knew exactly what was wrong, and went into town, found a tire shop with an empty lot next to it, and got turned around and got the car off, took it in. They exchanged the valve stem for me. I asked for a metal valve stem, and they said they had them, but for whatever reason that instruction didn't make it to the shop. I got another rubber valve stem, and they offered to change it for a steel one, and I said, no, just leave it, and I'll deal with it when I get home. And so they only charged me $11.38. Couldn't believe it. Obviously the guy felt bad and just charged me for the valve stem. It was awfully kind of him. Nice guys. And in Statesville. And made that trip. But I'm going to do a whole video on that trip. You'll see it. It was quite the ordeal. But we got up. I got up there okay. The cat was fine. She was a good cat. She is a good cat. She is a good cat. She travels very well. Though, the third week when we got home, she was happy to be home. But she is a good cat. She travels well and doesn't fuss very much. So, anyway, so that's my update. I have high praise for the radius rods, high praise for the heavier anti-sway bar. Koni shocks were a good improvement, and it really made a difference. I think can you imagine? I'm actually done modifying the suspension. I think I'm done. I mean, there's other things I could do, but I think I'm done. I'm very pleased with the way the RV drives, and I think we're good for now. So, hope that found that useful, interesting. See you on the road. Happy trails.